August 28, 2025. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, a solemn figure approached the cameras. UN Secretary-General António Guterres had come before the press with a message that was at once urgent, uncompromising, and heavy with moral weight. His words were not simply a diplomatic statement. They were an indictment of a war that has become synonymous with human suffering. The Secretary-General began by addressing what he called the latest in a long and horrifying series of attacks. He spoke of Israeli strikes that, in his words, had crossed into the realm of the unconscionable. He pointed directly to the attack earlier this week on Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. An assault followed swiftly by another. Together, they killed civilians, including medical staff and journalists, people whose very purpose was to heal and to inform. All of it, he reminded the world, happened under the gaze of international cameras. And then came his searing conclusion. We have seen yet more unconscionable Israeli strikes, including earlier this week at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. One attack was followed by another, killing civilians, including medical personnel and journalists who were carrying out their essential work, all with the world watching. I know so many of the reporters here, along with us, have lost dear colleagues. These attacks are part of an endless catalogue of horrors. There must be accountability. The words echoed through the chamber. They were not only about statistics or official reports, they were about people, about human beings caught in the collapse of law and the breakdown of humanity itself. By naming journalists and medical workers, Guterres personalized the devastation. He reminded those present that this was not a distant tragedy, but one that had taken lives of colleagues, of healers, of truth-tellers. Then his tone grew heavier still. In a second statement, he painted an image so stark that it left little room for doubt. Gaza is piled with rubble, piled with bodies, and piled with examples of what may be serious violations of international law. Hostages taken by Hamas and other groups must be released, and the atrocious treatment they have been forced to endure must stop. Civilians must be protected. Let's be clear. The levels of death and destruction in Gaza are without parallel in recent times. Famine is no longer a looming possibility. It is a present-day catastrophe. These were not words chosen lightly. They carried the weight of international law, and the implication was unmistakable. The devastation unfolding in Gaza may amount to war crimes. The insistence on accountability, the demand that civilians be shielded from violence was in line with the very foundations of the Geneva Conventions. Guterres was reminding the world that the rules of war are not optional, they are obligations. Yet, as his statement suggested, those rules have been trampled again and again. The reference to famine struck particularly hard. For months, aid agencies had warned of food shortages and collapsing health systems. Now, the Secretary-General confirmed the worst fears. Famine was no longer looming, it was already present. Starvation had joined bombs and bullets as a weapon of war, leaving children and families trapped in a cycle of hunger and despair. It was a catastrophe not measured in abstract numbers, but in empty plates, malnourished bodies, and hospitals without supplies. Guterres also insisted that the plight of hostages held by Hamas and other militant groups could not be ignored. In the same breath that he condemned Israeli strikes, he demanded that hostages be freed and that their mistreatment end immediately. This balance was deliberate. It showed that while the suffering in Gaza was immense, the violence was not one-sided. For the Secretary-General, both indiscriminate bombardment and hostage-taking violated the norms of humanity and the laws that bind all nations. The gravity of his message reflected the dire reality. Entire neighborhoods in Gaza have been flattened. Hospitals like Nasser have been reduced to rubble or left barely functioning. Journalists covering the war have become targets, with many killed while carrying out their essential work. Meanwhile, humanitarian convoys struggle to deliver aid, often blocked by insecurity or outright denial of access. The UN's own relief agencies warn that without dramatic change, an entire generation risks being lost. And yet, Guterres' words carried more than condemnation. They carried the weight of law and history. By invoking violations of international law, the Secretary-General laid the groundwork for accountability. War crimes are not accusations made casually by the UN's highest official. They are statements that could one day shape investigations, prosecutions, and the collective memory of this war. His warning to the world was unmistakable. History is watching, and silence will not absolve those who allow atrocities to continue. The political context, however, complicates every call for justice. At the UN Security Council, where Guterres made his remarks, divisions run deep. the United States continues to back Israel's right to self-defense, often shielding it from resolutions critical of its conduct. Other nations, including those in Europe, Latin America, and across the global south, demand immediate ceasefires and humanitarian access. In this gridlock, accountability remains elusive. For many observers, the Secretary-General's condemnation reflects not only the horrors in Gaza, but also the paralysis of the international system. Beyond New York, the consequences reverberate across the globe. In capitals from London to Amman, from Paris to Santiago, protesters flood the streets, demanding an end to the bloodshed. Aid organizations warn that the destruction in Gaza will destabilize the region for years, fueling radicalization and resentment. Families displaced by the conflict may never return home. Generations of children are growing up in trauma, their futures scarred before they have even begun. This is why Guterres' warning carried such urgency. His description of Gaza as a place piled with rubble, piled with bodies, is not just metaphor. It is the reality captured by photographs of shattered buildings, by video footage of grieving parents, and by reports from exhausted doctors who work with dwindling supplies. It is a reminder that the destruction is not distant. It is immediate, visible, and undeniable. And yet the Secretary-General's words are also a test for the international community. Will the world allow this endless catalogue of horrors to continue unchecked, or will his call for accountability and civilian protection galvanize leaders into action? His message was both a mirror and a challenge, a mirror reflecting the cruelty of this war and a challenge to those with power to stop it. As António Guterres stepped away from the lectern, his words remained hanging in the air. Gaza, he had said, is a place of rubble, bodies, and broken laws, a place where famine has arrived, where civilians are crushed under the weight of war, and where international law risks becoming meaningless. He offered no illusions, only a demand that the world remember its duty, that the suffering not be normalized, and that accountability, however delayed, remain inevitable. For the families mourning their loved ones, for the hostages awaiting release, for the children going to sleep hungry under bombardment, the Secretary-General's statement was a reminder that their suffering is seen. Whether that recognition leads to action, however, is a question that remains unanswered.
Very good morning. Good morning. Secretary-General will make a statement. We will not be taking questions today.
Dear members of the media, Gaza is piled with rubble, piled with bodies, and piled with examples of what may be serious violations of international law. Hostages taken by Hamas and other groups must be released, and the atrocious treatment they have been forced to endure must stop. Civilians must be protected. And let's be clear, the levels of death and destruction in Gaza are without parallel in recent times. Famine is no longer a looming possibility. It's a present-day catastrophe. We have seen yet more unconscionable Israeli strikes, including earlier this week at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. One attack was followed by another, killing civilians, including medical personnel and journalists, who were carrying out their essential work, all with the world watching. I know so many of the reporters here, along with us, have lost their colleagues. These attacks are part of an endless catalogue of horrors. There must be accountability.
Thank you.